It is December 7th, 2025, and we are watching as yet another round of talks between US and Ukrainian officials just concluded in Miami. Reports say that Zelensky got quite the difficult phone call, as we are also watching this trend in which Zelensky is being blamed for it all. Don't worry about the fact that it was the US and Europe who were the ones fueling all of this corruption in Kiev. Oh no, Zelensky is the one who is to blame. He is not only the perfect US puppet, but he has also become the fall guy. All of this as you have reports here in the West acting like Trump actually has some sort of a peace plan. Like he's actually presenting something that Russia could and should agree to. Like he's actually ready to be done with this war. In fact, you've got Trump's own son saying that he may pull all support for Ukraine. But is that something that we should be holding our breath for, waiting to see if it actually happens? And what should we be keeping in mind when it comes to these talks? Well, we got into all of the latest on this week's episode of Sanctioned, an exclusive weekly deep dive series for my paid subscribers. So let's take a listen to a free preview of this week's episode now. And let's start off with the latest comments from Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., who was asked at a recent event in Doha about whether he thought that his dad would be willing to just walk away from Ukraine for good.
But is your hunch that President Trump is going to walk away?
I think he may. What's good about my father and what's unique about my father is you don't know what he's going to do. The fact that he's not predictable, he's not following the playbook of every clown who's, again, been a bureaucrat for decades.
Now, I'll be the first to say that I don't know that the US is ready to be fully done with Ukraine. I mean, I think that the Trump administration is ready to try to sell this idea to the public that, oh, we're just going to sell weapons to Europe, we're going to profit off of it, and then Europe is going to handle this proxy war against Russia. That's what they have been building things up to for a while now. But of course, if they continue to do that, things are going to continue to fall apart in Kiev and also in Europe. And the US is going to be in a position of being increasingly isolated, especially if they do not secure a deal with Russia that is going to put them in a position where they are pulling all support for this war altogether. And the US really is in a no-win situation here, right? If they make a deal with Russia tomorrow and basically say, hey, we're giving up any support for Kiev, we're giving up any NATO support for Kiev, and we are going to try to move forward with peace. Well, the US doesn't see that as a win for them, and they certainly don't want to agree to all of the terms that Moscow has put forward. That's why they keep trying to sell them this ridiculous version of a deal, which we'll get into some of the latest particulars on that. But there's also the no-win situation of as you continue this support, right? However the US continues it, whether it's direct to Kiev, whether it's through Europe as this sort of middleman, when Kiev eventually falls apart, it's not an if, it is a when at this point, then you see how bad it is for the US and Europe that they poured so much money and weapons and resources and all that they did to prop Ukraine up as this proxy state to go after Russia. Now, I know that there was never any winning this war against Russia, right? That wasn't why the US did it. It wasn't that they thought that they could really take on Russia and win a war on the battlefield. However, we do have to pay attention to the fact that the US is in this position now where any outcome is going to be seen by many in Washington as a bad deal. Even if they were to sign a deal with Russia tomorrow, completely normalize relations, lift all of the sanctions, and so on and so forth, Washington still would not be happy with that. But there is one thing I've noticed in recent weeks that is very interesting, and that is this use of Zelensky as the fall guy, right? We saw it, well, we've been seeing it for nearly a year now, starting with Trump's infamous press conference in the Oval Office with Zelensky. But we've also seen it in recent weeks as you have this NABU investigation, this US-backed quote-unquote anti-corruption body investigating Zelensky's government and going after some key players within his inner circle. They're making it clear that, look, Zelensky, you are operating on borrowed time here, and that time is running out soon. And you saw that reflected in the comments that we heard from Donald Trump Jr., where he also specifically called out Zelensky.
It was a far more corrupt country than Russia, as delegated by the United States government prior to this war. But then, because of the war, and because he's one of the great marketers of all time, Zelensky became a borderline deity, especially to the left, where he could do no wrong. He was beyond reproach.
And right on cue, you have the New York Times reporting that Zelensky's government sabotaged oversight and allowed corruption to fester, saying that Ukrainian leaders blame independent advisors for failing to prevent graft. A Times investigation found that Zelensky's own administration removed guardrails. And I appreciate that anyone is acting shocked somehow, right? Shocked at this idea that corruption was running rampant in Ukraine, which was already one of the most corrupt nations in the world in the post-2014 era. After the US got in there, backed a coup in Kiev, the corruption just got worse and worse. And yeah, it's going to get a lot worse in the post-2022 era because you have the US and Europe throwing hundreds of billions of dollars in funding and weapons and supplies at Ukraine. We had the reports, which didn't last very long here in the West, that only a small portion of those weapons were actually getting to the front line. So I am not surprised whatsoever to hear that an already corrupt country got increasingly more corrupt when you had the US and Europe throwing everything that they had to offer at it for this war against Russia. But of course, the Times is not arguing that the US and Europe are at fault here. Instead, they're pointing out the fact that to protect their money, the United States and European nations insisted on oversight. They required Ukraine to allow groups of outside experts, known as supervisory boards, to monitor spending, appoint executives, and prevent corruption. But over the past 4 years, a New York Times investigation found the Ukrainian government systematically sabotaged that oversight, allowing graft to flourish. They then go on to point out that Zelensky stacked boards with loyalists. And it's like, yeah, that's what he's been doing with his government for nearly 4 years now. He has been getting rid of any kind of dissent and claiming that he's going after corruption. That has been very obvious. And yet, it's the mainstream media that have acted like for years now that, oh, everything is above board. There's no corruption in Ukraine. Don't worry about it. There's no far-right neo-Nazis. They're not having any sort of effect. It certainly didn't get worse. Their ideology did not run rampant in the last decade, thanks to all of the support from the US and thanks to all of the ways in which the US use these extremists to do what they always do, to take control of the government. Instead, they're making it Zelensky's fault because he is the fall guy. He is the ultimate bad guy here. And you're supposed to believe that when Zelensky is eventually removed from office, oh, well, that whoever replaces him is not going to be corrupt. Whoever replaces him, especially if it's someone like Valery Zelensky, who is even more pro-neo-Nazi, is even more pro-Ukraine getting nukes and pro, a longer war with Russia, if you can imagine that. Zelensky is even worse than Zelensky in a lot of ways, but the US doesn't care about that. They are just looking for a new puppet. Zelensky was their puppet. He was a very useful puppet, and he stayed in power a little bit past his term there, but he was useful to the US. Now the US looks and they see that they need a new puppet, and that is exactly what they are at least getting things ready to let you know that they are pursuing. Because if Zelensky was just suddenly kicked out of office, then everyone would look around and go, oh, well, wait a second, what happened, right? What was wrong with Zelensky? You had him up on a golden pedestal for years and years now, and all of a sudden you act like he is a problem. Well, no, instead, they are storyboarding this out. They are showing you all of the ways in which Zelensky is a problem. Suddenly, they care about corruption. Suddenly, they care about Zelensky surrounding himself with only loyalists. He's only going to be surrounded by people who are going to keep his secrets and who are going to engage directly in the corruption, because it's a reminder to all of us that this corruption has become normalized in Kiev, right? That we are not dealing with a situation where you have Zelensky just acting alone, or let's say his chief of staff, Andrei Yermak, just acting alone and overseeing things. No, They are all complicit. That's how it goes. And Washington is probably side-eyeing Kiev a little bit because we know that we have a lot of corruption at home here in the US. And one of the ways that it flourishes is that you have a large enough group of people that are in on it. You look at Congress, you see all the ways in which they know how to play the game. They know when they are supposed to sign off on the US quote unquote defense budget every single year. They're signing off on $1 trillion defense budget with no real oversight, no real accountability, pursuing endless wars around the world. And yet, why do all of these members of Congress do it? It's not because their constituents in their home districts are all for it and all for World War III. No, it's because they know that that is what is required of them in order to keep playing the game. And that was a free preview of this week's episode of Sanctioned. You can catch the full video available right now if you sign up as a paid subscriber over on my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. You can also catch it on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.